Hello, my name is Ashani Yapa. I'm a registered migration agent here at Sirus Migration. In today's video, I'm going to answer some of the most frequently asked questions about employee-nominated visa, subclass 482. With the recent COVID-19 pandemic and also the border restrictions and the limitations on the current skilled migration program, the demand for subclass 482 or the employee-nominated visa has gone up quite significantly. And we do get many inquiries from prospective clients and our existing clients who are holding the visa. And we have gathered some of the most frequently asked questions, and I'm going to answer them today so you can understand if this visa is the right visa for you and your family. The first question that we get asked is, do I need a sponsor for this visa? Can my family sponsor or do I need an employer? For subclass 482 visa, yes, you do need a sponsor, which means an employer. It doesn't have to be an Australian registered business, can be an overseas business who has a branch in Australia, but you do need a sponsor who are willing to offer you a job and who are willing to nominate you for the whole process. The next question is, what documents do I need from my employer? Well, we do need quite a few documents from your employer because the visa has 3 steps: the sponsorship, nomination, and visa application. The first 2 steps are responsibility of the sponsor or the employer. So we do need documents such as financials, their business registrations to prove that they have a valid, legitimate business in Australia. They have the capacity or the turnover to afford this position that they're going to offer the nominee. And also they want to make sure that they've paid their taxes and their GST or other obligations in Australia. And also we need documentations to prove that they cannot find a equally qualified Australian from their local area. And also we need documents to prove that the position genuinely stays in the business and it is not created for the purpose of the visa. So as I said, we do need quite a few documents from the sponsor. So what we normally do, once we talk to an applicant, we set up a meeting with the employer and talk to them directly as well to explain their responsibility and also get them an understanding of what they're getting into. And sometimes we deal directly with the employer because they don't want to share their sensitive documents all with the applicant or with you, and we get those kind of documents from them directly. The next question is, what is LMT? LMT stands for Labour Market Testing. The reason behind LMT is to make sure that giving an opportunity for an overseas employee, they are not undermining any Australians that they could hire locally. How you do LMT? The requirements have changed recently. The latest requirement is you need to advertise the job, the vacancy, including the pay in English medium and explaining where the employer and who the employer is going to be. And they must put a job advertisement in Job Outlook, the Australian government website, plus 2 other mediums of advertising. So it could be Seek, Indeed, there are some job platforms like this, or it could be one of these platforms and your employer's website. So depending on the capacity of the employer, we normally advise them what are the best platforms to advertise the job. And it has to go up for 28 days. And the employer will have to provide a report showing how many applications they received from Australian, and if they couldn't find an Australian, why, and give sort of a report explaining that they have tried to find an Australian, but they couldn't find one to fulfill this position. The next question we get asked most is there an exemption for LMT? So as I explained earlier, LMT stands for Labour Market Testing, and it is a mandatory requirement before the employer nominates the employee for the particular position. But if Australia has an international trade obligation to the nominated employee's country, sometimes you could be exempted from doing the labour market test. It is quite complicated which countries and which situations that you get exempted from. So I will put all of the countries and people who could be exempted from LMT in the description down below. So if you're not sure, get in touch with the migration agent before starting your process, because it's very important to understand if you're exempted from that, because that could save all of the job advertisement and all the hassle for the employer. The next question is, what is the medium term stream and what is the short term stream of subclass 482? What are the differences between, and how do I find out which stream I'm eligible for? So to answer this question, I want you to understand that there are two occupation lists. One is called MLTSS and the other one is called STSOL. I will put a link to two of these occupation lists in the description down below. So the first thing is we have to find out which list is your occupation is in. For example, chef is in MLTSS or the medium to long term list, whereas cook is in short term list. So if your occupation is in medium to long term list, then you have to apply for this visa under the medium to long term stream. But if your occupation is in the short term list, you can only apply for subclass 482 visa under the short term stream. And under the short term stream, you can only apply for the visa up to 2 years, whereas under the medium to long term stream you can apply for the visa for up to 4 years. So that is the difference, and the reason behind the two occupation lists is Australian government has identified some occupation where Australia will only have a demand in the short term. So those are the occupations that are on the short term list, whereas some occupations they believe will be needed in Australia in the long run. So those occupations are in the long term list and has the opportunity to get the visa for the applicant for up to 4 years. The next question is, can I include my family in this visa? Of course, yes. As most of the Australian visas, you can include your dependent children and your spouse in this visa as dependents. So being dependents, they don't really have to fulfill any other requirement other than meeting health and character and be a family member of you. But the only thing that we have to keep in mind, especially these days, is to apply as a family unit for this visa, you have to stay in the same place when we are lodging the application. So for example, if you're lodging this application onshore in Australia, your family members will have to be in Australia. Or if you're lodging this offshore out of Australia, then all of the family members, including the main applicant, will have to stay outside of Australia at the time of lodgement. So how do I fix this if my family is back home and I am currently in Australia? So what we can do is we can first apply for the main applicant and get the visa granted, get the subclass 482 granted. Then we can apply for a subsequent entrant for all the family members who are residing outside of Australia. The next question we get asked is about the work experience requirement. Do I need work experience? How many years prior work experience? And can this work experience be anywhere? So to answer this question, you do need 2 years prior experience at the time of the visa grant for subclass 482 visa. This experience has to be full-time equivalent, and this experience doesn't have to be gained at your current employer or the employer who's giving you the nomination. This work experience can be anywhere in the world, doesn't have to be in Australia, as long as we can prove that it was paid employment and it was taken in your nominated occupation or a very closely related occupation to the nominated occupation. The next question is, what is the minimum pay I should get from my employer? So the answer is, the minimum amount is called TISMIT, which is the threshold for employer-nominated visas, currently sitting at $53,900. But that doesn't mean that's the only pay you should get from your employer. We also have to prove that the pay that you're going to get from your employer is the annual market salary rate for that occupation. So for example, the pay a chef gets could be different to the pay a software engineer gets in that area at that time. So keep in mind, we have to make sure that your pay is higher than $53,900 plus it is equivalent to the or within the range of annual market salary rate for your occupation. Another very interesting question that we get asked all the time is, do I need a skills assessment to apply for subclass 482 visa? To answer to that question, you do need a skill assessment depending on the occupation and which country you're from. So in the description down below, again, I will put a list of occupations where you need a skill assessment depending on the country of your passport and where you studied. So it depends on quite a few things before we can figure out whether you need a skill assessment or not. So again, this is a question that you should ask individually depending on your situation from your migration agent before you start the process to figure out whether you need a skill assessment or not. The next question is, what is the minimum age to apply for subclass 482 visa? The answer is there is no minimum age to apply for subclass 482 visa. It doesn't really matter how old you are at the time of applying for 482, the temporary visa, but of course there is a minimum age to apply for permanent residency from subclass 482 visa, which I'll be covering in my next video about subclass 186 or the permanent visa. But for subclass 482, there is no minimum age. The next question is, what costs are there and who has to bear the costs? So the visa has 3 steps: sponsorship, nomination and visa application. The first 2 steps, sponsorship and nomination, all the costs must be bared by your employer. So the cost involved is the sponsorship application fees and the nomination application fees and the SAF levy. So the biggest concern most of the time is the SAF levy, which is the Skilling Australia Fund levy. It depends on the turnover and the number of years the employer is willing to sponsor you. So if your employer has a turnover of under $10 million, they have to pay $1,200 for each year of nomination. If the turnover is over 10 million, then the employer will have to pay $1,800 for each year of nomination. And the visa application fees can either be paid by the employer or the employee, and the application fee again will depend on whether you are applying for short-term stream or long-term stream, and if you're including your family members and how many of them that you're going to include in your visa application. So again, this is something you should get in touch with your migration agent to find out, because it will change depending on your situation. So the next question is, can I get permanent residency through subclass 482 visa? Yes, if you apply under the medium to long-term stream, there is a permanent residency pathway, which is called subclass 186 TRT, or the temporary resident transition. So if you work for your employer for 3 years while holding a 482 visa in the medium to long-term stream, then you can apply for permanent residency. But if you apply under the short-term stream, then unfortunately there is no direct permanent residency pathway through the subclass 482 visa. The question that we get asked most these days is, what happens when I'm holding a 482 if my employment is terminated? So if you lose your job while holding a 482 visa, your employer has an obligation to let the Department of Immigration know within 28 days that the employment has ceased. And you have 60 days to either find a different employer to sponsor you. If not, you will have to look for a different visa option or have to leave the country, because if you are not working for the same employer, you have a risk of getting a visa cancellation. The next question is, while holding a 482 as a main applicant, can I do some work on the side, a part-time job, or work for another employer as well? Or can I go to a different position in the same business? So the answer to this is, there is a condition 8607 imposed on your subclass 482 visa, which limits you to only work for the nominated occupation for the nominating company. So if your occupation changes to a different ANSCO code in the same company, then again you'll have to lodge a new nomination and attach your visa application. But if it's a very similar position in the same organization, it could be fine. But again, you cannot work for a different occupation than the nominated occupation or a completely different employer. You can't even work part-time for a different employer. This could lead to a visa cancellation. The next question is, what if I hold a subclass 482 visa but I want to change my employer? Is this possible? So currently, if you're holding a subclass 482 visa attached to one employer, you can only work for that employer until if you find a new employer who lodges a new nomination on behalf of you and attach the current visa to the new nomination. So this nomination has to be approved. If they have to apply for a sponsorship, of course they have to do that first and then get the nomination approved. Then only you can safely start working for your new employer. The last question is, does Australian government provide any financial support for subclass 482 visa holders because of the COVID-19 pandemic? The answer to this question is that there is job seeker payment which is extended for Australian citizens, permanent residents or eligible New Zealand citizens, but it is not extended for subclass 482 visa holders. And again, same with the JobKeeper payment, which is extended for Australian permanent resident citizens and eligible New Zealand citizens, but it is again not extended for subclass 482 visa holders. But as a subclass 482 visa holder, you are able to access your superannuation fund up to $10,000 during the pandemic if you have lost your job and you do need financial help. I hope I managed to answer some of the most common questions you may have about subclass 482 employee nominated visa. But if you have more questions or if you would like to start this process or to find out if this is the right visa for you and your family, please get in touch with us. We are more than welcome to assist you in any way possible. Thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do so. We try our best to get one video out at least a week with regards to Australian migration. Thank you.